Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. We have our continuing guest segment every month, and we have, as always, esteemed guest Bill Holter joining us for the updates on the all things financial, particularly in the aspects of precious metals. And we always look forward to getting his cogent insight. So if you're new to the podcast, please do like, subscribe, and share, as it helps the channel grow and others to gain in the knowledge you're being afforded. As you well know, Bill has many years as a broker, and he is a precious metals expert of many, many decades and has done the circuit of many different quality podcasts to include most notably X22. And as always, we're honored to have in the new year, Bill Holter. Bill, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back, John.
Oh, thanks for coming back. We really are honored to have you as always. So Bill, getting right to it as we always do, we have a new year, thankfully, with President Trump getting in safe and sound. So that crisis was thankfully averted. We can see he's kicking butt with executive orders going all over the place, and especially from an economic standpoint. What is it you would like to see him do going forward as his top priority, and what do you think will actually happen?
Well, I think all of the executive orders to this point have been excellent. I mean, there were so many things that were wrong, and it looks like it's only what, a full week right now. It has been in office, and look what was done. I mean, probably it took a week to reverse the executive orders that Biden put in that were basically put in to destroy the country. I'm not real happy with some of his cabinet picks. It seems that you've got war hawks sitting in his cabinet. So that's not real comforting. On the downside, I think it was pretty embarrassing, or is pretty embarrassing, that they came out just before the inauguration with the Trump and the Melania meme coins. I think that's just, I don't know, P.T. Barnum-ish. And I really don't think that's something a president should do, but he's doing it. I am concerned that, and even though he did sign an executive order about no CBDC, I think what that's talking about is a worldwide CBDC. I'm pretty convinced in the next 4 years, we will see them try to do away with any type of physical paper currency and come forth with an American CBDC. So I think that's dangerous. Another thing that I think is, and this remains to be seen, but we've heard, I think, from Elise Stefanik and a couple others, that they're posturing to put a law in, an anti-Semitism law in place. And I think that's really bad because, there's two sides to every story. There is obviously two sides to the Israel-Gaza story. And if you can't speak your mind and criticize either side, then where's the First Amendment?
It's a compelling argument for sure. It's a lot to good and bad, as you said, on both sides of the aisle. So I guess a good segue to that comment, Bill, would be, as we've discussed prior, President Trump obviously can't save the system, and it's clear that he's not trying to. The deep state would love nothing more than to dump this crash on his watch, but as you know, he has countermeasures in place. Wouldn't this be the optimal time here for him to default the system and reintroduce the gold standard and audit the Fed?
Well, first off, auditing the Fed would open such a can of worms. I mean, auditing the Pentagon is going to open a can of worms. Auditing all of these NGOs are going to open a can of worms. So, we'll just put it this way: sunlight is lethal. As far as tanking the system, I don't know. That's a difficult thing. I mean, do you really believe Trump wants that to happen on his watch? And there is talk about using the gold that we supposedly have, and let's put a figure on that of what, $700–800 billion. I mean, there's no way that they can put that into Bitcoin or any other digital currency, which is essentially digital air, and use that to pay our debt off. I mean, that's a ridiculous thought process. Now, could they revalue, if we had all the gold, could they revalue all the gold, uh, you know, however many, 100, 200, 300 times? Yeah, they could do that. Um, and that would avert a default, obviously. But a default is, you'll see a default in one of two ways. And one way I don't think you'll see it is they're not gonna they're not gonna outright default and not make payments because they can print dollars. And the printing and the overprinting of dollars, what that's going to lead to is a crushed purchasing power for the dollar, which when foreigners or even Americans get paid back, they're getting paid back in something that's worth way, way, way less. So we're going to go through a default sequence. It all depends on what it's going to look like. But I don't know. I think it'll be pretty difficult for them to start a crash by saying we're going to abolish the Fed. If they're going to abolish the Fed, that would be done during and or after a collapse.
Okay. Well, it's an interesting point before we move on, Bill, about what you made about, would you want the system to crash on his watch? Because optically, on one sense, that'd be bad, but then you could argue the inverse, that he could use that to his advantage to save the system and become the hero. So he might, that's another thought possibility as well.
The only thing I see wrong with that is, can you imagine how many people will die under that scenario just from lack of food? Or lack of heat in the north, and if it happened in the summertime, lack of cooling, air conditioning, etc. in the south. I mean, yeah, on a piece of paper, it doesn't look so bad, but when you're talking about real people losing basically their entire, losing their capital, and that's not to mention that what's left is going to be taken away in the Great Taking, because those laws are in effect, and they're in effect worldwide.
Well, one thing's for sure, Bill, we can agree either way is we can't stay the way we are. It's unsustainable. From an economic standpoint, something's going to have to give at some point. So,
that's the fact. The math does not lie.
Yeah. So I guess we're just, we're exploring, obviously, but one way or another, something's going to have to give. And obviously we're working together to do our best to help the people take countermeasures, whichever way it goes, so that they're protected, which we'll get into, as you know, in a moment. So another concern, Bill, is the debt ceiling. It doesn't look like President Trump can or will raise it. So do you see him suspending it or just removing it altogether? And if so, how long of a process could that take?
Well, he has suggested that we get rid of the debt ceiling. I mean, the debt ceiling, in theory, sounds nice. And, we did it, I don't know, originally, 35, 40 years ago, as a way to comfort foreign investors that they're not going to be flooded with $1 billion worth of bonds, which has happened. I mean, the system has been flooded. Would it be a long process? Probably not. I mean, if they could put the votes together in Congress, he would sign it because he doesn't want a debt ceiling. But again, it's meaningless because they hit the debt ceiling and they raise it. They hit the debt ceiling and they raise it. I mean, it's basically unlimited borrowing, unlimited spending, unlimited Ponzi.
Yeah. Well, again, something's going to have to give here, and it's just saw these different angles and ways that it could go. China, as we've discussed before, Bill, in many previous podcasts, is hemorrhaging money, and as you know, has major problems. Looks like they're running into the safety of the BRICS to insulate themselves alongside buying gold and silver privately hand over fist. They're going to be ordered by GOP Senator Martha McSally of Arizona to pay back nearly $2 trillion on sovereign debt that they owe. With all that said, China looks to be the first country to go down. But as we've discussed before, does it even matter?
Well, it does matter. I mean, I would just say go back and look at the Great Depression, the 1930s. You just got a role reversal for the United States. I mean, back then we were the up and coming country, and Britain was basically uh, the world's reserve currency, or the go-to currency. And here in present time, you've got China that's the up and coming power and going to pass the United States at some point if they have not already.
Mm-hmm.
And the United States assumes the role of what Britain was. So it matters very much what happens with China, because I mean, if China goes down, and there's no way the system, if China goes down, everyone goes down. And you could say that about even some smaller countries, just because of the derivatives that are the credit default swaps. Look at the credit default swaps. What would happen? Pick a country. Let's say not a huge country. Pick Italy. What if Italy went down and the credit default swaps blew up? I mean, how many credit default swaps are there outstanding? And then what does that do to the balance sheets of the losers? I mean, this is a scenario with any and all assets, whether it be stocks, interest rates, commodities, countries themselves. The amount of derivatives outstanding, that is the nuclear bomb. And the question is, what's the fuse?
Hmm. I apologize. What I should have said and what I meant to say, Bill, and rephrasing the question is, does it matter if China's the first one to go or if it's another country? Because ultimately, like you said, the fuse is wherever it goes, it's going to create. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. So thank you for. The
answer is no.
Okay.
Right.
I just want to reiterate that to the audience, because we've talked about it before, and it's something I thought about in our previous discussions. To that point, another discussion point we've had, Bill, is you've been very adamant, and rightly so, about telling me that gold is the last man standing. And yet we see a stilted growth in the precious metals market at this point, although gold seems to be eyeing up in the amount of 2,800 and beyond, with silver to follow. How much longer do you see in your data projections before the precious metals market actually starts to break out and soar?
I would say that it's already started to break out and soar. I mean, first off, gold and silver, the reason you want to own them is because they cannot bankrupt. And that's why you've got nations all over the world buying gold, because they're stuffing it into their reserves, and that's part of their balance sheet that cannot default. And everything else, all fiat currencies can default. Gold was up, what, 30% last year? Can you imagine? I mean, that's part of a revaluation process that's happening. But can you imagine if the dollar, the world's reserve currency, was up 30% in a year or down 30% in a year on the USDX? What kind of upset would that have? And people would be screaming like crazy. Look at the dollar, whether it be going up or going down. I mean, look at the huge move. But they look at gold, it was up only 30% last year, and it's not really doing anything. Well, I beg to differ. I think you're seeing the revaluation begin, and it's in progress.
I agree, and you can see that actually to my next point. I'm glad you said that, because that segues nicely to what you're talking about in terms of overseas. You see BRICS amalgamating, getting stronger by the day. You had 10 countries jump on board recently, with at least another 25 plus coming on board. You have the threats of President Trump's 100% tariffs don't really seem to be phasing them at all. As they get stronger and continue to build momentum, how much longer do you see before they actually do pull away from specifically the Fed dollar, which, as you know, has no reserves and is not federal?
Yeah, I don't think that they're going to actually I don't think they want to be the ones that tip the dollar over. I mean, if you think about the Chinese mentality, they're happy just waiting and waiting. I mean, they do 99-year leases. That's past the lifetime of anyone ever signing uh, the documents. So I think what they're willing to do is just sit back and let us collapse. Now, you mentioned tariffs, and everybody, people are talking about tariffs uh, as uh, not something that could be disastrous. And all you got to do is go back to the Great Depression, and what really killed the real economies worldwide were the tariffs, the trade wars. What happened was trade collapsed, and that collapsed the real economy. So, tariffs, while they sound good on paper, they are a problem. Um, so anyway, just to wrap that up, I mean, tariffs, we're going to find out what the real effect of tariffs are.
Okay. Yeah, we will. And that's why I was curious to get your take, which you said you definitely addressed that, and what effect, if any, they have on, as you said, the BRICS and other countries for that matter. You see Judy Shelton, kind of lurking a lot behind the scenes with articles, making stronger and stronger claims about the likelihood of returning to the gold standard with constitutional sound money. Do you see her being brought back by President Trump to do so? And if so, when would you anticipate us finally auditing the Fed, which, as you know, hasn't happened since 1956?
Well, you're talking about auditing the gold, not the Fed. Fort
Yeah,
Knox has not been audited since 1956.
correct.
I don't know that the Fed has ever had a true audit. I mean, Ron Paul back in the late 80s and early 90s was trying to get the Fed audited, and it's never happened. As far as Judy Shelton goes and coming back to a gold and silver standard, um, I would find that highly unlikely because governments understand if you make a currency convertible, ultimately it's going to convert. It will convert into gold, it will convert into silver, and then the inventories will be depleted. I think it's much more likely that if we do go to some type of gold backing, that it's a ratio back. Uh, when I say a ratio back currency, I don't know, 20% of the currency. They'd have to, no matter what, they'd have to revalue gold higher. And again, that's assuming we have the gold we say we do. But assuming that it's the fact, they'd have to revalue gold higher in order to do a 20% backing or a 40% backing. And that's exactly what the BRICS are talking about, is backing their currency with various commodities, gold being somewhere between 20 and 40%.
Exactly, which is why you're right, which is why I brought that up about in the earlier question about BRICS, because I think that's what they're sort of clandestine doing, is backing up with precious metals. Because you look at the yen, for example, Bill, I think it was last year, they devalued by about 25%, but yet behind the scenes, they were backing it with gold. And I think that's kind of what the BRICS are ultimately doing as well with their respective countries. We see President Trump.
Yen? Wait, whoa. Hold on a
Yeah.
second. You said the yen?
Uh-huh.
The yen or the yuan?
The yen,
Japanese yen.
believe it was the yen. Yeah.
I don't believe the Japanese yen is backed or not even tacitly backed by gold. That's a new story. If that's true, that's something I haven't heard, that they're backing the yen with gold.
Well, that's what we've been.
And
Sorry, go ahead.
as long as we're talking about Japan, I do want to mention, if you go back to, I think it was August of last year, there was a 3-day span where their stock markets were down 25% in 3 days.
Hmm.
That's like the equivalent of 1987 crash.
Hmm.
Uh, there's no way you can tell me that there were not derivatives that absolutely blew up behind the scenes
Hmm.
and were saved by central banks.
Yeah, that's an interesting statistic I hadn't heard about in terms of their market going down like that. So that's something I'll have to certainly look into. But yeah,
It
that's
happened in 3 days.
in 3 days. Yeah.
It was a 3-day event, and I'm pretty sure it was August.
Okay. Okay. Duly noted. I'll certainly research that. Thank you. Thank you for that. We see President Trump working to remove well, it's certainly talking about it. You saw it, in his rally in Vegas on Saturday to remove the IRS and all the fraudulent three organizations summarily, which, while being a good thing, isn't in and of itself enough. The push for smart cities rages on, with I think 40 states getting on board. In addition to becoming your own central bank, which we always talk about from a financial standpoint and being diversified, I was looking at information on your page, billholter.com, and one of the subjects you talked about was a particular interest to me and our team. And that is, in terms of being diversification, how important would it be for you or to you to relocate to states and areas that support sound money as well as constitutional sovereignty?
Uh, that's long term. When I say long term, it's at least 3 to 5 years out.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if you had the money to relocate, I mean, assuming you're already not in a city and you're living rural and you're prepared, and let's say that you're on a farm in Illinois and you wanted to relocate. The question is, do you have the money, the capital, the wherewithal to maintain your place and relocate and have that place built out and turnkey ready? So when you hit the ground there, you've got backup power, you've got clean water source, your food stocks are all stored up. Do you have the ability to do that? If you do, well, yeah, get the hell out of Illinois and go to a more tax friendly state. But again, the reason I'm saying this is, if you don't have the wherewithal to do that and you need to sell a place, well, good luck with that, because as coincidences do happen, you could be in the middle of your move, the system come down, and you don't have either place.
Hmm. Good point. Good point. Actually,
You get stuck in the middle.
right, you'd be stuck. Yeah, definitely. Actually, I wasn't planning on asking you this, but since you brought up that important point, I was curious to ask you, Bill, if you're aware of it or not. That's fine. Speaking of the housing market, when we have, it seems like we're kind of in between the melt up and the bust, or we're certainly coming to that point. When would you see that happening? And how we talked last year about the commercial real estate market. We already know that's in the tank, but the residential real estate market seems to have been holding steady, but that seems like it's going down. When would you surmise that might be coming?
In fact, it's already come down. If you look at the volume of existing home sales.
Okay.
That's completely crashed. I mean, the volume's probably 50% or maybe even a shade under 50% of where it was a couple years ago. And price always follows volume. You've got people that will not sell because they can't get the mortgage rate that they currently have because rates gone higher. People aren't able to refinance. People, buyers aren't able to afford these higher prices and the higher interest rates. So I think the meltdown in housing is already, it's already happening under the surface.
Sorry, I lost you there, Bill. Can you say that last line, please?
Yeah, I'm sure you've got people who would like to sell and they can't sell either because they can't afford uh, the current mortgage rates on a new place, or the buyers just aren't there.
Hmm.
And I think where you're going to see the earliest, and I think you're actually seeing it, like in South Florida, you're seeing condos. People are actually starting to walk away from them just because of the taxes and the insurance alone.
Right.
So I think the exodus is going to be from the cities. So you're gonna it's not going to be a thing where everything goes down together. You're going to see one go down and the other maybe even go up a little bit. And I'm talking about rural versus urban.
Right.
I think there is already, and I think there's going to be more demand for rural property
Mhm.
because people understand that in a system down scenario, you don't want close neighbors.
Exactly right. And that's why I'm glad you said that, because to your point, I think it has started in Florida. I think northern and central Florida, there's a glut of properties, 50% reductions in some cases. I was just curious, how long that will take to proliferate out into the rest of the country, because then you see areas in red states like Tennessee, for example, who are doing extremely well, haven't felt it yet. But to your point, it's happening under the surface. So it'd be interesting to see how
Right.
long it takes for that to, you know, proliferate out to the rest of the country. Last question for today, Bill, is I'm very curious on your opinion of the President Trump's presidency with respect to the discussion of the annexing of Canada, Greenland, and the Panama Canal. Do you see any policies that may help or exacerbate that situation?
Um, President Trump he's a dealer. He's a promoter. And I think if we were to annex Greenland, and I'm not, I'm sure Denmark is going to say no, but I think the way that will probably filter down is that I think they're probably going to have an election in Greenland. Who do you want? You want Denmark or you want the US? And I think that's pretty important from a strategic metals standpoint. And as far as Canada is concerned, I think that's Trump probably just poking Trudeau. As far as the Panama Canal is concerned, I need to know more information on that. I mean, I've not dug into it as to uh, who's actually running it. Is it China actually running it? It just doesn't seem right that if China is running it, it's in our backyard basically. Would China want us to run some type of choke point that's close to their boundaries? I would say no. So I I personally would like to see some clarity on Panama.
Yeah, I agree, and it's going to be very interesting to say the least how this all plays out. But it's just good to be able to talk about it and get the elephant in the room for the public to kind of get that extra knowledge base. So as always, thank you again.
Yeah, but John,
Please.
John, just understand that uh, President Trump is a deal maker. He's
Mhm.
been a deal maker his entire life.
Right.
So no matter what comes out of his mouth, no matter how outrageous, there's generally a reason behind it.
Mhm.
And when you make your first offer, it's always a crappy first offer and a crappy second, third, fourth offer until you're getting closer, to meeting somewhere in the middle. But just understand that some of the things that he comes out with are uh, straw men, if you will,
Mm.
to start the deal making process.
Good point. Kind of like the book, as you remember, They Are the Deal, and he talks a lot
Right,
about that.
exactly.
Yeah. So no, that's
Right.
a very solid point. Thank you. Bill, as we close out today, as always, last thoughts that you have for the audience, and where can people find your work?
Um, it seems like my last thoughts are for the last 6 months to a year have been pretty much the same. I mean, make sure you are prepared because it's like the sky is falling, the sky is falling. It's gonna fall. I don't know when. You don't know when. Nobody. Well, I shouldn't say nobody knows when because there are some people out there that do have the ability to pull the plug on the system. Uh, but when this thing goes dark, it's gonna go dark. You're gonna be on your own, truly on your own. Whether you live or die, whether you have food, whether you're able to protect yourself, whether you're in a good location or bad location, those are all your choices. So, make your plan and work as hard as you can, as quickly as you can, because like I said, nobody knows when this is going to happen, but we do know that mathematically the current system, the way it is is going to be no longer at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just untenable. And folks, you can go to billholter.com. You can get a consultation with him, and he can help you with any areas of need that you have, particularly in the precious metals market. We will leave that link, as always, in the description. Bill Holter, thank you for joining us, good sir. We appreciate it. Have a blessed day, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, sir.